Why was she standing at the back of the briefing room? That's the question no one asked. But maybe they should have. The training facility buzzed with the usual energy of elite operators preparing for certification trials. Voices echoed off concrete walls. Boots scraped against polished floors. And in the middle of it all, one woman stood completely still, her presence so unremarkable that most didn't even notice her there. Captain Emma Hayes, 38 years old, 5'5", graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, standard issue fatigues that hung loose on her frame. She looked like someone's administrative assistant who'd wandered into the wrong building, not like someone who belonged among the tip of the spear. The other candidates noticed her, of course. They always did. Young, sharp-eyed operators who'd fought their way through selection, convinced they'd earned the right to be here. Most of them were men. Most of them were half her age. And most of them had already dismissed her before she'd even spoken a word. "Is that someone's mom?" one of them muttered, not quite quiet enough. "Probably works in supply," another replied, smirking. Emma heard them. She always did. But she'd learned years ago that some battles weren't worth fighting with words. Some lessons had to be taught differently. She was here for one reason: her daughter. Not to prove anything to anyone, not to relive old glories, just to pick up her daughter, Lieutenant Sarah Hayes, who was finishing up her marksmanship qualification in the adjacent range. Sarah was everything Emma had once been. Young, fierce, determined. 23 years old and already earning respect in a world that didn't give it easily. Emma had driven 3 hours to watch Sarah shoot, to be there when her daughter achieved something that mattered, because that's what mothers did. They showed up, even when showing up meant standing in rooms where nobody wanted you. The range officer's voice cut through the chatter. "All right, listen up. Before we break for the day, we've got a special demonstration." Emma glanced toward the voice. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, 6'2", black belt in combatives, lead instructor for the advanced sniper program. His reputation preceded him. Tough, demanding, effective. But there was something else in his reputation too. Something darker that Emma had noticed in the way her daughter's letters carefully avoided mentioning him by name. Webb's eyes swept the room, landing on Emma with the precision of a predator spotting prey. "You know what I love about this job," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Teaching people the difference between thinking you can shoot and actually being able to hit a target under pressure." Several candidates shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't part of the scheduled training. "Ma'am," Webb said, walking toward Emma with exaggerated courtesy, "I don't believe we've met. You're Lieutenant Hayes' mother, correct?" Emma nodded once. "That's correct, Staff Sergeant." "Well, since you're here watching your daughter train with the best," Webb continued, his voice dripping with false warmth, "I was wondering if you've ever been curious about what we do here. Ever thought about picking up a rifle yourself?" Emma felt the room's energy shift. Every eye turned toward her. Sarah, who just emerged from the range, froze in the doorway, her face going pale. "Not particularly," Emma replied, her voice steady. Webb smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Come on now. I bet you've watched all those military movies and thought I could do that, right? Maybe wondered what it would be like to be the hero." A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the crowd. Emma noticed several of the younger officers looking away, clearly uneasy with where this was heading. "Actually, I haven't," Emma said quietly. But Webb wasn't finished. He was playing to his audience now, feeding off their attention like oxygen. "You know what? I've got an idea. How about a little friendly demonstration? Nothing serious. Just a quick shooting drill to show everyone here the difference between real training and, well, wishful thinking." Sarah stepped forward, her voice tight. "Staff Sergeant, my mother doesn't." "It's okay, sweetheart," Emma interrupted softly. Webb clapped his hands together, the sound sharp and sudden in the tense air. "Excellent. Don't worry, Mrs. Hayes. We'll keep it simple. Wouldn't want to embarrass someone who's probably never held a weapon before." The condescension was unmistakable. Several of the candidates exchanged glances. Some looked ashamed. Others seemed eager for the entertainment. "This really isn't necessary," Emma said. "Oh, but it is," Webb insisted, spreading his arms wide. "Too many people these days think they understand what we do because they've seen a few action movies. It's important to understand the reality of combat versus, well, civilian life." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Emma felt something shift inside her. Not anger. Anger was hot, impulsive, uncontrolled. This was something colder, something she hadn't felt in years. A familiar weight settling onto her shoulders like an old coat she'd forgotten in the back of the closet. "Besides," Webb added, clearly enjoying himself, "what's the worst that could happen? You miss a few targets, we all have a good laugh, and you get a free lesson in humility. Consider it a gift." Around the room, reactions were mixed. Some candidates looked mortified. Others seemed caught up in the spectacle. The range safety officer stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene. Emma glanced at her daughter. Sarah's eyes were wide with a mixture of worry and something else, something that looked like recognition, because Sarah knew. Sarah had always known, they just never talked about it. "One condition," Emma said quietly. Webb raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "When this is over, you apologize to these soldiers for wasting their training time." Webb's laughter echoed through the facility, sharp, mocking. "Apologize? You're going to be the one apologizing for wasting government ammunition." Emma simply nodded. She reached up and pulled the hair tie from her ponytail, letting her graying hair fall loose for a moment before retying it tighter, more secure. The movement was mechanical, practiced, the muscle memory of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before going into the field. "Mom," Sarah whispered urgently, "you don't have to do this." Emma squeezed her daughter's shoulder gently. "Sometimes, honey, bullies need to be reminded that strength comes in many forms." What happened when she picked up that rifle? The walk to the firing line felt longer than it should have, each step measured, deliberate. Emma's sneakers made soft sounds against the concrete floor, a stark contrast to the combat boots worn by everyone else in the room. She could feel their eyes on her back, judging, dismissing, already convinced they knew how this would end. Webb was already at the range, setting up targets with theatrical flourish. "We'll keep this simple," he announced to the crowd. "Standard rifle qualification. 5 rounds at 300 meters. Let's see if our guest can even hit the paper." 300 meters. For an untrained shooter, it was an impossible distance. Even for trained soldiers, it required skill, focus, breath control. Webb was setting her up for public humiliation, and he wasn't being subtle about it. The range safety officer, a younger sergeant named Martinez, approached Emma with a rifle. His expression was apologetic. "Ma'am, I have to ask, have you ever fired a weapon before?" Emma took the rifle from his hands. Her fingers found their positions automatically. Left hand forward on the handguard, right hand on the pistol grip, trigger finger extended along the receiver. The weight of it settled into her arms like it had never left. "Once or twice," she said softly. Martinez's eyes narrowed slightly, noticing something in the way she held the weapon. But he didn't comment. He simply stepped back and gestured toward the firing line. Webb stood off to the side, arms crossed, that same predatory smile on his face. "Whenever you're ready, Mrs. Hayes. No rush. Take all the time you need to figure out which end the bullets come out of." More uncomfortable laughter from the crowd, but it was thinner now, uncertain, because something about Emma's posture had changed. The tired mother who'd walked into the facility had disappeared. In her place stood someone else, someone who moved with quiet precision. Emma approached the firing line, dropped into a prone position with fluid grace that made several of the younger operators blink in surprise. Her body alignment was textbook perfect, legs spread for stability, elbows planted. stock seated firmly in the pocket of her shoulder. She reached for the magazine. And that's when the first person in the room understood. Her movements weren't hesitant, weren't exploratory. They were automatic, practiced. The muscle memory of someone who'd done this so many times that thinking about it would only slow her down. Magazine inserted, bolt released, safety off. The rifle became an extension of her body. "Target?" she asked, her voice calm. Webb pointed. "Center mass, 300 meters, can't miss it. It's the big rectangular thing downrange." Emma settled her cheek against the stock, found her sight picture. Her breathing slowed, deepened, and then something remarkable happened. The facility fell completely silent. Because everyone watching suddenly understood they weren't looking at an amateur. They were looking at someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Emma's first shot cracked through the air, clean, controlled. Downrange, the target monitor lit up, center mass, dead center. Webb's smile faltered. Emma didn't pause, didn't celebrate, didn't even seem to notice. She simply acquired her next target and fired. Another perfect hit, then another. Each shot coming with mechanical precision, the rhythm of her breathing synchronized perfectly with the trigger press. 5 rounds, 5 perfect center mass hits. The silence in the room was deafening. Emma engaged the safety, cleared the weapon, and stood up with the same fluid grace she'd shown going down. She turned to face Webb, her expression unchanged. Not smug, not triumphant, simply calm. "That was the easy part," she said quietly. "Would you like me to continue?" Webb's face had gone from smug to confused to something approaching concern. You got lucky, beginner's luck." "You think so?" Emma asked. There was no challenge in her voice, no mockery, just a simple question. Several of the candidates had pulled out their phones, clearly sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Sarah stood frozen at the back of the room, tears already forming in her eyes, though whether they were from pride or relief or something else entirely, she couldn't say. "Let's make this interesting," Emma continued. "You choose the targets, you choose the conditions, you choose the difficulty, and we'll see what happens." Webb's jaw tightened. He couldn't back down now, not in front of his students, not after pushing this confrontation. "Fine, moving targets, 500 meters, wind conditions. You won't even see them at that distance without a scope." "I don't need a scope," Emma said simply. That's when the range safety officer Martinez stepped forward. His voice was quiet but firm. "Staff Sergeant, maybe we should." "Set it up," Webb snapped. Martinez hesitated, then nodded. He walked to the control panel and programmed a new drill. Downrange, mechanical targets began to appear at varying distances. Small, fast, difficult even for experienced shooters. Emma returned to the firing line, but this time she didn't go prone. She stood, adopting a standing, unsupported position that made several of the candidates gasp. It was the hardest shooting position, the least stable, the one that separated true marksmen from everyone else. She loaded a fresh magazine, raised the rifle, and waited. The first target popped up at 400 meters. Emma's shot rang out almost simultaneously. The target dropped. Another target, 500 meters, moving left to right. Emma led it perfectly, dropped it mid-movement. A third target appeared, partially obscured by a barrier, only a small portion visible. Emma's shot found it anyway. By the time she'd engaged and eliminated 10 targets in under 30 seconds, the entire room understood. This wasn't luck. This wasn't beginner's chance. This was someone operating at a level most of them would never reach. Webb stood frozen, his face ashen. Emma cleared her weapon again and turned to face the room. "The thing about marksmanship," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence, "is that it's not just about pulling a trigger. It's about patience, breath control, understanding your weapon, understanding yourself." She paused, letting her words sink in. "It takes years to build real skill. You can't just watch a few videos and think you're ready for the real thing. Several people in the room flinched, recognizing Webb's earlier words thrown back at him. "You're absolutely right," Emma continued, looking directly at Webb. "So maybe before you decide to humiliate someone in front of their daughter, you should make sure you know who you're dealing with." Who was she before she became just another mom in the parking lot? The question hung in the air like gunsmoke. Webb stood there, his confidence shattered, his authority undermined by his own arrogance. Around the room, candidates who'd been laughing minutes ago now avoided eye contact, suddenly very interested in their boots. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady despite the emotions clearly warring across her face. "My mother," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "is Captain Emma Hayes, retired, Marine Corps Scout Sniper, three-time champion of the International Sniper Competition, instructor at Scout Sniper School for 8 years before she left the service." The impact of those words rippled through the facility like a shockwave. Several of the older candidates' eyes went wide. A few pulled out phones, fingers moving frantically across screens. Within seconds, their expressions shifted from skepticism to awe. Because Emma Hayes wasn't just any name. In certain circles, among certain people, that name carried weight, legend even. "Holy hell," one of the candidates whispered, staring at his phone screen. "She's in the record books. Longest confirmed kill at the time of her retirement, 1,847 meters. That was in Helmand Province," another read aloud. "She held that record for 6 years. Webb's face cycled through emotions. Shock, embarrassment, and finally, slowly, something that might have been wisdom beginning to dawn. Emma set the rifle down on the bench with careful precision. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "I retired 12 years ago," she said. "When Sarah was 11. I'd been deployed 7 times, missed countless birthdays, school plays, first days of school. I'd chosen the rifle over my daughter for too long." She glanced at Sarah, and for the first time, real emotion cracked through her controlled exterior. "So I made a choice. I walked away from everything I'd built, every accomplishment, every record, because being her mother mattered more than being the best shooter in the Marine Corps." The room had gone completely silent. This wasn't just a lesson in marksmanship anymore. This was something deeper, something that cut to the heart of what it meant to choose, to sacrifice, to understand what truly mattered. "I became an accountant," Emma continued, a small smile playing at her lips. "Exciting, right? I traded rifles for spreadsheets, combat deployments for PTA meetings, and you know what? I've never regretted it, not once." She turned back to Webb and her expression hardened slightly. "But that doesn't mean I forgot who I was. It doesn't mean I lost my skills. It just means I chose not to lead with them, because there's more to strength than proving you have it." Webb swallowed hard. The room waited. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, his voice quiet. "And I owe them one too." He gestured toward his students. "This wasn't teaching. This was bullying. This was my ego making decisions my brain should have made." Emma nodded. "The strongest thing you can do is admit when you're wrong. Your soldiers will respect you more for it, not less." Webb straightened his shoulders and turned to face his class. "Everyone, I made a serious mistake today. I let pride override judgment. I made assumptions based on appearances. Captain Hayes showed me what real professionalism looks like. Not just the technical skills, but the wisdom to know when and how to use them." He paused, then looked back at Emma. "And the grace to not humiliate someone even when you had every right to." Emma's expression softened. "We all make mistakes, Staff Sergeant. What matters is what we learn from them." One of the younger candidates raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Emma nodded. "How did you know that he was going to do this? You could have just left, could have avoided this whole thing." Emma was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "I didn't know," she said finally. "But I've been around enough bullies in my life to recognize the type. people who need to prove their strength by making others feel weak. And I learned a long time ago that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to let them expose themselves. She glanced at Sarah. My daughter has to work with Staff Sergeant Webb, has to train under him. If I just walked away, nothing would have changed. He'd still be the same instructor tomorrow. But now, she looked back at Webb, now maybe things will be different. Another candidate spoke up, this time a young woman with corporal stripes. Ma'am, do you ever miss it, the service, being a sniper? Emma considered the question carefully. Every day, she admitted. There's a part of me that will always be a Marine, always be that person who lived for the mission, for the precision, for the moment when everything aligned and you knew you were exactly where you needed to be. She paused. But I also know that life isn't about living in the past. It's about making peace with who you were so you can become who you need to be. I needed to be Sarah's mother more than I needed to be Captain Hayes, so that's what I became. But you're still both, Sarah said quietly. You never stopped being either one. Emma smiled at her daughter. Maybe, but one takes precedence, always. Martinez, the range safety officer, stepped forward. Captain Hayes, if you don't mind my asking, would you be willing to run through some advanced drills? For educational purposes. I think everyone here could learn a lot from watching you work. Emma glanced at her watch, then at Sarah. Her daughter nodded enthusiastically. I suppose I have a few more minutes, Emma said. What did you have in mind? What followed was a masterclass in marksmanship that none of the candidates would ever forget. Emma walked them through techniques that most had only read about in manuals: wind reading, moving target calculations, breath control under stress, the mental discipline required to make impossible shots in impossible conditions. She spoke in calm, measured tones, breaking down complex concepts into understandable pieces. When candidates asked questions, she answered with patience and clarity, never condescending, never dismissive. This was teaching, real teaching, the kind that came from decades of experience combined with genuine desire to pass on knowledge. Webb stood to the side, watching, learning. His earlier arrogance had been completely stripped away, replaced by the humility of someone who just realized how much they didn't know. As the session drew to a close, Emma cleaned the rifle one last time and handed it back to Martinez. Thank you for indulging an old shooter, she said with a smile. Ma'am, you're not old, Martinez replied. You're just getting started. Emma laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to lighten the entire room. I appreciate that, Sergeant, but these days I'm happy to leave the shooting to the younger generation. They're in good hands with instructors like you. She deliberately didn't look at Webb when she said it, but the implication was clear. Good instructors taught, bad ones bullied. Webb had a choice about which one he'd be going forward. What does it cost to walk away from everything you're good at? The parking lot was quieter than the facility. Darker too. The sun had set while Emma had been teaching, and now only security lights illuminated the rows of vehicles. Sarah walked beside her mother, neither of them speaking at first. Sometimes words felt inadequate for what needed to be said. You didn't have to do that, Sarah finally offered as they approached Emma's aging sedan. Yes, I did, Emma replied softly. He's going to hate me now, make my life hell during training. Emma stopped walking and turned to face her daughter. In the dim light, Sarah looked so much like Emma had at that age. Same determined jaw, same fierce eyes, same refusal to back down even when backing down would be easier. No, Emma said firmly. He's not, because if he does, you'll report it. And if reporting doesn't work, you'll call me, and I'll make sure it gets handled properly. But I don't think he will. I think he learned something today. What's that? That respect isn't demanded. It's earned, and it can be lost in an instant when you abuse it. They resumed walking, Sarah's boots and Emma's sneakers creating an odd rhythm against the asphalt. Why did you really retire? Sarah asked. I mean, I know you said it was for me, but there had to be more to it than that. Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried weight that hadn't been there during the demonstration, the weight of memories she didn't often visit. There was a mission, she said finally, Kandahar. I was providing overwatch for a patrol, young Marines. Some of them weren't even old enough to legally drink back home. I'd been doing it for years by then, countless missions, countless shots. I was good at my job, maybe the best. She paused at the car but didn't open the door. There was a target, high value, someone responsible for IED attacks that had killed dozens of our people. I had him in my sights, perfect shot, everything aligned, wind, distance, angle. It would have been the easiest shot I'd made all deployment. Sarah waited, sensing there was more. But something made me hesitate just for a second. And in that second I saw a child run into my sight picture, a little girl, maybe 7 years old, playing in the street completely unaware of the danger around her. If I'd taken that shot when I should have, without hesitating, I would have killed her too. Collateral damage, acceptable losses in the math of war. Emma's voice had gone very quiet. That little girl looked exactly like you did at 7. Same hair, same way of moving. And I realized that I'd been doing this for so long that I'd almost forgotten what I was supposed to be protecting, who I was fighting for. I'd become so good at killing that I'd lost sight of why killing was sometimes necessary. Sarah's eyes were wet in the parking lot lights. So I finished my deployment, put in my retirement papers, came home, and I chose to be your mother instead of a weapon, because weapons don't get to choose what they are, but people do, and I chose you. Sarah stepped forward and hugged her mother tightly. I'm glad you did. Me too, honey, me too. They stood there in the parking lot, 2 generations of women who'd chosen military service, holding onto each other like anchors in a storm. When they finally separated, Sarah wiped her eyes. You know, all those candidates are going to look you up tonight. You're probably going to be famous again by morning. Emma shrugged. Let them look. The past is the past. I'm not ashamed of who I was, but I'm not defined by it either. I'm just Emma now, accountant, mom, sometimes volunteer at the school library. That's enough. Is it though? Sarah pressed. Don't you miss it, even a little bit? Emma considered the question as she unlocked the car. Yes, she admitted. I miss the clarity of it. In the field, you always knew what mattered, complete the mission, protect your team. Everything else was noise. Real life is messier. There are no easy targets, no clear sight pictures. You just do your best and hope it's enough. She smiled at her daughter. But messy is okay. Messy means human, and I'd rather be human than perfect any day. They got into the car. Emma started the engine, and the radio came to life with classic rock from a local station. They sat there for a moment, neither quite ready to leave yet. What was it like? Sarah asked. Being the best, being someone everyone respected and maybe feared a little. Emma thought about it. Lonely, she said finally. You'd think being the best would make you feel complete, but it doesn't. It just makes you a target for everyone who wants to prove they're better. And it makes it impossible to have normal relationships because you're always aware that people see the legend before they see you. She shifted the car into reverse. That's why I never told you most of my stories, why I didn't fill the house with medals and commendations, because I didn't want you to think that's who I was. I wanted you to know me as Mom, the person who made terrible pancakes and couldn't figure out your math homework and fell asleep during movie night. Your pancakes aren't that terrible, Sarah offered with a smile. Yes, they are. They're awful, but they're made with love, and that counts for something. As they drove through the night toward home, Sarah found herself thinking about everything she'd witnessed that day. Her mother, standing calmly in front of hostile instructors and skeptical candidates. Her mother, picking up a rifle like it was an extension of her own body. Her mother, teaching with patience and grace even though she had every right to be angry. Mom, she said quietly. Yeah, honey. Thank you for showing up today, for standing up for yourself, for teaching them, for all of it." Emma reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "That's what mothers do. We show up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the lights of the highway stretching out before them like a ribbon through the darkness. "Are you going to tell Dad about what happened?" Sarah asked eventually. Emma laughed. "Oh, your father is definitely going to hear about this, probably from about 15 different people before we even get home. Someone in that facility was recording on their phone. I'd bet money on it." "Are you okay with that?" Emma considered. "I am. Let them share it. Let them talk. Maybe someone else who's been underestimated will see it and remember that appearances don't define capability. That would be worth a little embarrassment." "You weren't embarrassed at all, were you?" "Not even a little bit," Emma admitted. "Proud, maybe, proud that I could still do it, that I hadn't lost what made me good at my job, but also proud that I walked away when it was time. Both things can be true. What makes someone choose to hide their strength?" 3 weeks later, Emma was back at her desk at Morton and Associates, the small accounting firm where she'd worked for the past decade. Fluorescent lights, gray cubicles, the soft tap of keyboards and the occasional ring of a phone. It was about as far from a military operating base as you could get. She liked it that way. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "You're not going to believe this." Emma smiled and texted back, "Try me. Webb asked me to stay after training. I thought I was in trouble." Emma's fingers hovered over the keyboard, concern creeping in. Another text came through. "He apologized, for real. Said he's been thinking about what you said, about respect and teaching. He wants to do better." Emma felt something loosen in her chest. "That's good, honey. Give him a chance." "I will. Also, he asked if you'd be willing to come give a guest lecture sometime on mental discipline and sniper fundamentals." Emma stared at her phone. She hadn't expected that. "You don't have to," Sarah added quickly. "I know you're done with all that." Was she, though? Emma sat back in her ergonomic office chair and considered the question. Done with military life? Yes. Done with deployment? Absolutely. But done with teaching? Done with passing on knowledge that might save lives? Maybe not. "Tell him I'll think about it," she typed. Her coworker Janet poked her head over the cubicle wall. "Hey Emma, you got a second? I'm stuck on this depreciation schedule." "Sure," Emma said, setting her phone aside. "Let me take a look." She stood and walked over to Janet's desk, her mind already shifting gears from military operations to tax code. This was her life now, helping people navigate financial complexity instead of navigating hostile territory. Both required precision. Both required patience. The stakes were just different. At lunch, Emma sat in the break room with her usual group: Janet, Marcus from IT, and Lisa from HR. They were talking about their kids' soccer games and upcoming vacations. Normal conversation. Comfortable. Safe. "Hey Emma," Marcus said suddenly. "Weirdest thing. My nephew is in the Army, advanced infantry training. He sent me a video last night. Said his instructor showed it during class." Emma's hand stilled on her sandwich. It was this woman at a rifle range, absolutely destroying targets. Instructor said it was the best demonstration of marksmanship fundamentals he'd ever seen. The woman looked familiar, but I couldn't place her until my nephew mentioned her name. "Emma Hayes. That's not you, is it?" 3 sets of eyes turned toward Emma. She could have denied it, could have laughed it off, could have changed the subject, but she'd spent too many years hiding who she was, and she was tired of pretending. "Yeah," she said simply, "that was me." The silence that followed was profound. "You were a Marine sniper?" Lisa asked, her voice climbing an octave. "For 15 years. And you never mentioned it." Janet looked almost hurt. Emma set down her sandwich. "It wasn't relevant. That person isn't who I am anymore. I'm Emma. I do your taxes. I bring cookies to the holiday party. I fall asleep during afternoon meetings. That's me now. But you were also that person, Marcus pressed. That's incredible. Why wouldn't you talk about it? Because, Emma said carefully, when you tell people you used to be a sniper, they start seeing you differently. They start treating you like you're dangerous or unstable or somehow broken. They can't separate the person from the profession. And I needed to be just Emma for a while. Still do. Lisa nodded slowly. I get that. My dad was a cop. He never talked about work at home. Said he needed a place where he wasn't Officer Rodriguez, just Dad. Exactly, Emma agreed. Still though, Marcus said with a grin, it's pretty badass. My nephew said his whole class was freaking out over that video. Apparently you're kind of a legend. Emma rolled her eyes. I'm a legend in very small, very specific circles. Most people have never heard of me and never will, and that's fine. But as lunch ended and they returned to their desks, Emma found herself thinking about Webb's invitation, about teaching, about whether there was value in sharing what she knew, even if it meant stepping back into a world she'd left behind. That evening, she brought it up with her husband, David. He was grading papers at the kitchen table, his reading glasses perched on his nose, looking every bit the high school history teacher he was. Webb wants me to guest lecture at the sniper school, Emma said as she chopped vegetables for dinner. David looked up from his papers. The same Webb who humiliated you. The same one who learned from it, apparently. And you're considering it. Emma paused, knife hovering over a carrot. I don't know. Part of me wants to help. If I can teach something that might save a life downrange, isn't that worth a few hours of my time? But, David prompted. But I also like being just Emma, like not carrying that weight anymore. Once you start going back, even as a guest lecturer, it's hard to keep those worlds separate. David set down his pen and gave her his full attention. I've known you for 12 years, married you for 10. And in all that time, I've never once seen you regret walking away from the Corps. You made your choice. You chose us. You chose this life, and you've been happy. I have been, Emma agreed. So the question isn't whether you should do it, David continued. It's whether you want to, not because you owe them something, not because you need to prove anything, but because you genuinely want to share what you know. Emma considered that. I think I do, she said slowly. I think there's value in showing those kids that you can be elite at something and still choose to walk away. That strength isn't just about how hard you can hit, but about knowing when to stop hitting, about choosing what matters. Then do it, David said simply. But do it on your terms, guest lecture, not a full return, not getting pulled back into that world, just sharing knowledge and then coming home to your family. Emma smiled at him. When did you get so wise? I married you, didn't I? That was pretty wise. She threw a carrot at him. He caught it and took a bite, grinning. That night Emma sat down and composed an email to Webb. She'd do it. One lecture. She'd talk about fundamentals, about mental discipline, about the importance of knowing why you were pulling the trigger, not just how. And then she'd come home and go back to being Emma the accountant. But as she typed, she found herself thinking about all those young soldiers who'd watched her shoot, who'd seen that skill didn't disappear with age, that mothers could be warriors, that strength wore many faces. Maybe there was value in that. Maybe hiding her light completely wasn't the answer. Maybe the balance was in showing it occasionally, carefully, on her own terms. She hit send on the email and closed her laptop. Tomorrow she'd go back to depreciation schedules and tax forms. But next month, for one afternoon, she'd be Captain Hayes again. Not because she needed to be, but because she chose to be. And that choice made all the difference. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The day of the lecture arrived with typical military efficiency. Emma drove back to the training facility, this time not as a visitor but as an invited guest. The guard at the gate checked her ID and waved her through with a respectful nod. Word had spread, apparently. Webb met her at the entrance, and Emma noticed immediately that something had changed in him. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something more grounded, more genuine. "Captain Hayes," he said, extending his hand, "thank you for doing this." "It's just Emma now," she replied, shaking his hand. "Or Mrs. Hayes if you prefer. I left the rank behind when I retired." "Old habits," Webb said with a self-deprecating smile. "The students are excited. We've got about 30 in attendance. Mix of infantry and scout snipers." They walked through the facility together. Emma noticed some of the same candidates from her previous visit. They watched her with open curiosity now, the dismissiveness completely gone. The classroom was standard military issue. Rows of desks, a projector screen, whiteboards on the walls. It smelled like coffee and determination, the same as every military training room Emma had ever been in. The student stood when she entered. Old habit, military courtesy. "As you were," Emma said automatically, then caught herself. "Sorry, old habit." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. Webb introduced her formally, listing her accomplishments and record. Emma stood there feeling oddly exposed as he recounted missions and medals she'd nearly forgotten about. When he finished, 30 sets of eyes looked at her with a mixture of respect and anticipation. Emma took a breath and began. "I'm not here to teach you how to shoot," she said. "You've got qualified instructors for that. I'm here to talk about the part that nobody teaches you in sniper school, the part that doesn't show up in the manual, the mental game." She walked to the whiteboard and wrote 3 words: purpose, discipline, peace. "Purpose," she said, tapping the first word. "Every time you look through that scope, you need to know why you're there, not the tactical why, not the mission brief, but the deep why, the reason that will keep you steady when everything inside you wants to shake." She paused, looking at the young faces watching her. "When I was deployed, my why was simple. I was protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Marines on patrol. Local civilians trying to live their lives in a war zone. Every shot I took was to prevent someone else from dying. That purpose is what made the weight of it bearable." A hand went up. Young specialist couldn't have been more than 20. "Ma'am, how do you deal with the weight after you come home?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, you don't, not completely, but you learn to carry it. You acknowledge what you've done. You don't hide from it or pretend it didn't happen. And you find ways to balance it with the person you want to be." She moved to the second word. "Discipline. This is more than just training. It's about controlling yourself when every instinct says to panic, when the adrenaline is screaming at you to do something, anything. Real discipline is the ability to be still, to wait, to breathe when breathing feels impossible." She told them about missions where she'd waited in position for 18 hours, about learning to ignore discomfort, thirst, hunger, about the meditation techniques she developed to stay focused through endless hours of watching and waiting. "But the hardest discipline," she said, "is knowing when not to shoot. There will be times when you have a clear shot, when the mission says take it, but something inside you hesitates. Pay attention to that hesitation. It might save your life. It might save someone else's." More hands went up. Emma answered questions about wind reading, target calculation, equipment choices, but she kept bringing them back to the mental aspects, the parts that couldn't be taught from a manual. Finally, she came to the third word: peace. "This is the one they don't prepare you for," she said. "How to find peace with what you've done. How to come home and be a normal person after you've taken lives. How to be someone's parent or spouse or friend when part of you is still in the field." The room had gone very quiet. "I'll be honest with you. I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you what worked for me. I chose to step away, to be a mother instead of a weapon, to prioritize the life I wanted to build over the life I'd been living, and that choice gave me peace." She looked around the room. "But that's my answer. Yours might be different. Some of you might find peace in continuing to serve, in being the best at what you do. There's no wrong answer as long as you're honest with yourself about what you need. A female corporal raised her hand. "Ma'am, do you ever regret it, leaving when you were at the top of your career?" Emma smiled. "Not once, because I understand something now that I didn't understand then. Being the best at something doesn't make you complete. It just makes you the best at that one thing. But life requires more than being good at your job. It requires being present for the people you love, being available, being human." She paused. "I was an incredible sniper. I take pride in that, but I'm also a pretty good mother, a decent wife, a mediocre accountant, and all of those things together make me who I am, not just the one that involved pulling triggers." The lecture went on for another hour. Emma shared stories, answered questions, walked them through mental exercises, and through it all she noticed something. These young soldiers weren't just learning about marksmanship. They were learning that it was okay to be complex, to be skilled and scared, confident and uncertain, strong and vulnerable. When she finished, the applause was genuine. Not the polite recognition of a completed lecture, but real appreciation for what she'd shared. Webb walked her back to her car afterward. "That was powerful," he said. "Thank you." "You're welcome." "Can I ask you something?" Webb hesitated. "That day you came here, when I challenged you, you could have destroyed me, completely humiliated me in front of everyone, but you didn't. Why?" Emma considered the question. "Because humiliation doesn't teach anything except resentment. I wanted you to learn, to grow, to be better. Crushing you wouldn't have accomplished that. But you did prove your point." "I proved I could shoot. That was never in question, at least not to me. But the real point was about respect, about not judging people based on appearances, about the dangers of arrogance. Those lessons required a lighter touch." Webb nodded slowly. "I've been thinking a lot about that day, about the kind of instructor I want to be, the kind of leader. You changed something in me." "Good," Emma said simply. "Then it was worth it." She got in her car and started the drive home. As she left the base behind, she thought about purpose, discipline, and peace, about the life she'd left and the life she'd built, about being a sniper and being a mother and how both had shaped who she was. Her phone buzzed at a stoplight. "Sarah." "How'd it go?" Emma smiled and dictated a response. "It went well, coming home now." "Proud of you, Mom." "Proud of you too, honey." As Emma drove through the fatting afternoon light, she thought about dignity, about strength that didn't need to announce itself, about power that chose restraint. She'd spent 15 years as a weapon, 12 years as a mother, and somehow, impossibly, both had made her better at being human. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. It shows up when needed. It teaches when asked. It protects without seeking recognition. It walks away from fights that don't matter and stands firm in the ones that do. Emma had been many things in her life: soldier, sniper, champion, mother, accountant, teacher. But underneath all those roles was something simpler. Someone who understood that true strength wasn't about how hard you could hit, but about knowing when to stop hitting, about choosing what mattered most and having the courage to walk away from everything else. The highway stretched ahead of her, leading home, to David grading papers, to the normalcy of dinner and dishes and helping with homework, to a life that didn't require rifles or medals or proving anything to anyone. She'd been the best once. She could still be the best if she wanted. But she'd chosen something better. She'd chosen to be enough. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.